Good afternoon. Thanks for coming over. Hope you're enjoying the fair. The topic today, word and image. We had some strong collaboration from the art newspaper. I was very pleased to see that they talked about how popular the association of word with image is in this fair. Total coincidence, of course. Our contemporary physics tells us that the universe derives from a single point. If that's the case, why do so often word and image stand apart? This is a piece by Jaume Plensa in the series called Echo. And as you remember, Echo was that woodland nymph who, because of her assistance to Zeus, was given the curse of not being able to originate speech. She had language, but she had no voice. So she could only repeat the last few phrases of what she heard. Behind her there is this formal Echo with Pau Açúcar in Rio de Janeiro. So in this great spiral, why is it necessary that we set these things apart? To what purpose are word and image separated in our artistic traditions? Has there been a purpose? Has there been something gained? Could something greater be gained if their origin were understood so that they could be put together, or if there were formal devices to put them together? This is the culprit. Descartes said that any point in space can be defined by these two coordinates, x and y. And in a way, these coordinates can stand for image and language, these two axes. And then this gentleman reminds us that anytime you have two coordinates, you've got an argument. So it's possible that if we approach this in a different way, a non-Cartesian way, we might be able to find some wonderful productiveness in word and image working together. I want to explain as we go along why this matter has an importance and give some great images of compelling things that touch on this subject. Is there something special to be gained in the conjoining or the separation of these two? We've seen evidence that they stood together in the past. This piece from Lascaux 40,000 years ago, although not image and word, is certainly image and breath. The technique of making these paintings, of course, was to spray from the mouth through a small straw the painting, leaving the handprint saying essentially, I am here, the human presence. Word and that vocable at the same time. But in its greatest form, what could be more perfect? This is an Assyrian angel. And if you look closely, running across the entire surface are the pecked glyphs of the cuneiform, running across hand and basket and fabric. And you imagine the speech of these angels. They live in this wonderful medium of word and image where everything is synthesized and together. But does any art actually stand apart from all others? Or is there always a social context and the issue and moment of performance that make all media multimedia? Aeschylus wrote about Thepsis that he was the inventor of the mask and the comely robe, and laid a stage of small planks and taught a lofty speech and stately gait on the buskin. This is quoted by Horus. And this account provides for an amalgamation of the visual with the verbal. But very quickly, there's a separation of these media, even though theater holds them together. Painters of masks are hired to adorn palaces and public buildings. and poets are invited to write books. They still do that, apparently. So the problem is Descartes again. Art and literature seem to be in different modes, different modalities, on different surfaces. Literature and poetry, novels, stories are all word-based and conceived to be sequential, time-based media. The visual arts are organized in space and exist fully in a moment of time. Extreme examples of this perhaps are like The Last Supper and the Divine Comedy, which both deal with the tragedy of human error, its consequences, portraying good and evil, steadfastness and deceit. One works in a single moment, and the other many, many hours of attention. The difficulty of this extreme distance between language and the visual, between language of the visual and the verbal, is locating the coordinates of these two. The way art as sign detached from a reference that language can bring ends up as ornamental and self-referential, an exercise in formal relationships divorced from the world. And such works tend usually to gain their power and popularity by force of the market, by scarcity, by the endorsements of people in positions of power. And if literature departs too much from sign, its weight and its interest seems to wane. Now, art has always found an accommodation with music. So this beer horse with a piece by Liszt. But the accommodation of image and text is more problematic. There are images that just by their valence, their nuance and sensitivity, seem to have no equivalent or accompaniment in language. Similarly, in literature, there are things that seem to reveal themselves perfectly through time. Why this rupture and unrest? Peace descending, come, O come into my breast, in all the treetops. Hearest thou hardly a breath? The birds are asleep in the trees. Wait, soon, like these, thou too shalt rest. That's Longfellow's translation of Goethe. Is there special power in this complexity, one medium holding its own, and this almost speciation that occurs as things become much more referential to other visual works or much more referential to other verbal works? Or does the power reside in the combination of word and image? This is a piece by Salvador Dali, Parfois je crache par plaisir sur le portrait de ma mère. Sometimes I spit with pleasure on my mother's portrait. The power of this got Dali disinherited by his father. And yet, this painting, Profanation of the Host, where the figure of the cipher for Dali is spitting into the host, doesn't seem to have raised the same ire. But is this kind of porosity that you get between the visual and the verbal really the most productive relationship? Are they more meaningful in each other's terms? This is a work by Leslie Dill taken from a poem of Emily Dickinson. And the poem reads, I heard as though I had no ear until a vital word came all the way from life to me, and then I truly heard. And so you see this turgid bronze ear and this feathery piece of paper coming out, commenting on silence and receptivity. We know that they are capable of approaching each other's terms, word and image. And as a matter of fact, they're genetically linked and gave rise to one another. Here are the ideograms for man, seas, horse. You can see the man's legs, his two legs. You can see the head over the two legs for the act of the mind. And then you see the human being attached to the horse as he embraces his thought. This is a bit tough to read, I'm sorry. This describes the alphabetic generation of the letter A. It started out as a sheep's head of Aleph, or actually an ox head in Mesopotamian, and then evolved through Greek, and it kept that same shape and same sound, for Aleph. Similarly, the word for water in Proto-Phoenician was mayim, and the image of the wave is what we get in the letter M, highly stylized. Similarly, word can become image. In our own illustrated traditions, the large initial letter sprang out of the text to mark different stages of the text, and then became much more significant, and finally begins to give rise itself to image, until the story opens from the initial. Image coming right out of the word itself. And then, as you see, almost departing from the text and taking its own life. Similarly, in some other traditions, there is a stop marking punctuation, as the Greeks did not have an ayet. And this ayet becomes more and more important until finally it becomes an illustrative technique itself, and you have a whole page just defining the single stop of breath. So what's the theoretical basis in our tradition for this separation? And it goes back to this guy named Horus, who created critical discourse, and he wrote an art of poetry. And in it he said, as in painting, so in literature. And the way the Latin is structured, as in literature, so in painting. And he gave the first formal description of the relation between the two. Considerations of subject matter, devices of illusion, personification, forms of structural or auditory imitation, metaphor, metonymy, brevity, expansion. All these terms come out of Horus's description, both of the visual and the verbal arts. And he said that art needs to have a history, and literature too, a basis in skill, and a core of common aspirations. The basis of skill is an interesting one, and it's one of the things we find at the Dali Museum that our visitors enjoy most, this absolute consummate ability to represent. And Horus said of skill, he said, a middling attorney is no danger. You can get your contract written up more or less, but a bad poet or a bad painter, that's a dangerous thing. The aspirations of art and literature, according to Horus: moral value, aesthetic beauty, the ideal of harmony, divine principles, and thus decorum. And so, depart for a minute on this idea of decorum, because the ideas of the moral value of art, the question of beauty, are very much alive today. Decorum, perhaps not so much. They've been challenged historically, these ideas, but we've come always to use these same measures. It's just that what we measure with these terms, we seem to come up with a different evaluation these days. He said of painting, not smoke after flame, but after smoke, the artist needs to give light. He says, in short, be the work what you will, let it at least be simple and uniform. He also said that we tell our stories starting in the middle and working then backwards and to the end, as in this Bernini sculpture, where Apollo reaches Daphne. Just as he touches her, they turn to stone. And she becomes a tree, as you know, the Daphne. Horus goes on, it has ever been and ever will be permitted to issue words stamped with the mint mark of the day, as forests change their leaves with each year, and the earliest drop off, so with words. The old race dies, and like the young of humankind, the newborn bloom and thrive. So this is a kind of Augustan credo of make it new. I don't think he'd approve of where our cinema is at this moment. He said, it is not fitting that Medea butcher her boys before the people, nor impious Atreus cook human flesh upon the stage, nor Procne be turned into a bird, or Cadmus into a snake. Whatever thus you show me, I discredit and abhor. But I want to just digress for a second and talk about the grotesque. And the grotesque, because I think that one way of looking at Dali and a lot of contemporary art has to do with a tradition of the grotesque. Its origin is not, of course, as we think of it, as something disgusting, but rather something undecorous, something where you have unexpected elements. So in the Domus Aurea, which was a palace from 64 AD, Nero's palace, you have animals with human heads, humans with animal bodies, and issuing from their trunks you have foliage, leaves, other creatures. In other words, you mix varieties, you create impure hybridizations. And this is the Trajan baths built on top of Nero's palace. It was discovered in the Renaissance, of course, and was a great inspiration to Raphael and others who descended to see Nero's palace. And it was created, all the internal murals were created by a painter named Fabulus. We have his name, and I think I have an image of him here. Yes. The traditions of the grotesque, of course, were very important to the avant-garde, and this idea of the exquisite corpse, a wonderful experiment in putting unlike elements together, transgressions to Horus's mind, and those terms still apply. I'd like to look now at some formal barriers to bringing word and image together. That is, what is there in the actual making of the art that sometimes makes it impossible to join these things? And to do so, I'd like to look at examples where they've been put together so beautifully. For instance, historically in maps, where you register the image of the place itself abstracted, seen as from the air. No human, and at the time of these maps, had seen that. And the words that name the places, or these translations of Miztec codexes, or historically botanicals. This is the New World goddess Tenonzin, and it's interesting that the mestizo world begins with an act of printing, and we think of bringing word and image together with printing because as the story goes, the young Indian was going through the mountains and was stopped by an apparition of the Virgin, and it was wintertime and nothing was blooming, and she said, "Take these to your bishop," and she produced roses, and as he held out his mantle and embraced them, he printed the image of the Virgin on his mantle. And maps being that great amalgamation. And in our own 20th century tradition, this wonderful livre d'artiste, where word and image, printed finely, words carefully written and printed as well, are brought together. From the Gray Gallery, this beautiful
sculptural work of Jaume Plensa again, the figure assembled out of words and almost kneeling like Narcissus in a pool of words. Salvador Dali wrote that form is always the product of the inquisitorial process of matter. The matter always creates a form that is appropriate to itself. And when he was writing his Secret Life, he handwrote all the text surrounding the images, thinking that that inquisitorial form of matter, you needed to have the same medium, the hand at work on the same substrate to bring these two together. New York, he writes, and I think this exquisite example of that merging of word and image. Un oiseau poursuit un abeille et la baisse. The bird pursues the bee and kisses it. Joan Miro. One of the problems, though, about word and text in painting is that, as those of you who have painted know, painting is a process of squishing paint onto a canvas, and it doesn't really lend itself to sharp, subtle angularities that our written language depends on. So that's a limiting factor when this has been done. Other times, historically, for instance, in the Bayeux Tapestry, you get the absolute same technique of handwriting with cross-stitch and hand imaging with cross-stitch. By the way, in terms of this, the idea of the immediacy of the image and the durational aspect of language, those of you who visited the Bayeux Tapestry, it can't be taken in a glance. It has to actually be read. It's a long, several hundred feet long. Printing is a medium that brings these two matrices together, image and text. This is a page from a book by Ed Ruscha, and it's a Mark Twain story about race, language, identity, and for it, Ed Ruscha chose to trace on paper the grain of wood, and at the same time, he's writing in dialect the grain of the American language as spoken by African American slaves in his day. So he's merging the physical technique of making and the concept of grain to create an image where both these things inhabit with the same energy. Another wonderful success is Bonnard's Parallèlement, where he's using the image of the language of Paul Verlaine and images in this wonderful sanguine color, the life of the night, the parallel life to the one we live. And of course, Matisse handwriting the cover for Verve magazine. There is, in technology, the opportunity, certainly in film, to bring these two to the same matrix. But as you see, because of the method they're applied to the film, they're held apart. Image and text, once again, held apart. We see in the tradition of cartoons an excellent amalgamation of word and image. Their production, however, is generally separate with the image made and then the text on a vinyl overlay. Raymond Pettibon, following in that tradition. But I wonder if there isn't a resolution to the conceptual distance between these two in the act of reading, because we really do accustom ourselves to read both text and image in a rather cultivated way. This work by Christopher Wool paranoiac, where he forces us actually to almost take on the suspicious caution of a paranoiac. And in his terrific Cats in Bags in River, where your active deciphering is so deliberate that you have committed this act before you realize exactly what it is. So those are examples of beautiful text on canvas. The Matisse liner cuts. This is for a book by Apollinaire, the poet. So I'd ask you to think, what story is being told here? And just as we read this image, literature, narrative, and story, all of the literature and all of our associations seem attendant and almost a part of that image, so that we know the story, we know its consequence. And I would question this idea that any image is absolutely simultaneous, nor does it depart from a context. And finding support in Walter Benjamin, there's no event or thing in either animate or inanimate nature that does not in some way partake of language, for it is the nature of each one to communicate its mental contents. Rouché's using this in a sense of contradiction and irony. Those spaces on the found National Geographic page he uses found words to rhyme visually but not conceptually. Be careful, else we be bagging on you. You hear me? Words that are unlikely to echo across that scene. Benjamin further writes, it's no longer conceivable that the word has an accidental relation to its object. Instead, he holds that every human language is really a failed and garbled translation of a divine language that speaks in both things and words. Heiner Bastian writes of Cy Twombly that Twombly insists on the transparency. Well, Heiner Bastian, I can't explain it. But Twombly's images seem to be born of that wonderful point where writing and drawing, writing and painting seem to come out of the hand in the same way. There's this wonderful organic origin of word and image in him. And coming back again to Horus, he illustrates